David loved old things. Not just any old things, but things with stories. That's why he collected old photographs. He wasn't interested in the famous people or big events usually captured in history books. David liked the everyday moments, a family picnic, a child's birthday, a group of friends laughing together. These pictures, he thought, held real life. His apartment, a cozy space above a bakery, was filled with albums and boxes overflowing with snapshots from different eras. David's favorite hobby was restoring these faded and damaged images. He had a knack for bringing them back to life, revealing the faces and details that time had tried to erase. David wasn't a historian or a detective, just a regular guy with an artistic eye and a patient hand. He worked as a graphic designer for a small advertising company, a job he enjoyed well enough, but his real passion was the photography. It was relaxing to sit for hours with a magnifying glass and special tools, gently removing scratches and correcting colors. He found it meditative, a way to connect with the past and the people in it. He was a quiet, observant person, content with his simple routines and the small discoveries he made in the faces of strangers from long ago. He had a gentle smile and kind eyes, and a genuine curiosity about the lives of others. One Saturday morning, David decided to visit the local estate sale. He rarely went to these events, but a flyer he'd seen taped to a lamppost advertising vintage photos and ephemera caught his eye. He figured it was worth a look. The sale was being held in an old Victorian house, overflowing with furniture, trinkets, and forgotten treasures. David made his way to a dusty corner of the attic, where several boxes of photographs were piled haphazardly on a rickety table. He sifted through them carefully, finding a mix of portraits, landscapes, and family snapshots. Most were in poor condition, faded and cracked, but he saw potential. One box, in particular, caught his attention. It was filled with photos from the World War II era. There were pictures of soldiers in uniform, women working in factories, and families gathered around radios. David was drawn to the stoicism in the soldiers' faces and the quiet resilience in the eyes of those left behind. He felt a deep respect for their sacrifice and a desire to preserve their stories. He decided to buy the entire box for a reasonable price, knowing he'd have plenty of work to keep him busy for weeks to come. As he carried the box back to his apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had found something truly special. Back in his apartment, David carefully unpacked the box, spreading the photos out on his work table. He sorted them by size, condition, and subject matter, making mental notes about which ones to tackle first. He decided to start with a group photo of soldiers standing in front of a military transport truck. The photo was significantly damaged. A large crease ran diagonally across the image, and the colors had faded to a dull sepia tone. There were also several scratches and water stains obscuring details. David knew it would be a challenging restoration, but the composition of the photo intrigued him. The soldiers looked weary but proud, their faces etched with the hardships of war. He scanned the photo into his computer and opened his restoration software. Using his digital tools, he began to painstakingly repair the damage, pixel by pixel. He smoothed out the creases, removed the scratches, and carefully brought back the original colors. It was a slow and meticulous process, requiring patience and a keen eye for detail. Hours passed as David worked, losing himself in the task. He zoomed in on each soldier's face, trying to imagine their stories, their hopes, and their fears. He felt a growing connection to these men, even though he knew nothing about them. As David worked on the face of one particular soldier, he paused. Something fell off. He zoomed in further, his brow furrowing in concentration. The more he looked, the more unsettling it became. The soldier's features were strikingly familiar. The shape of the jaw, the curve of the nose, the set of the eyes, they were all his. David leaned back in his chair, blinking in disbelief. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. It was impossible. He zoomed in even closer, scrutinizing every detail. And then he saw it. On the soldier's left cheek, just below the eye, was a small crescent-shaped scar. David reached up and touched his own cheek. He had the exact same scar, a memento from a childhood tree-climbing adventure. It was faint, almost unnoticeable, but it was undeniably there. A shiver ran down David's spine. It couldn't be a coincidence. The resemblance was too uncanny. It was as if he were looking at a younger version of himself, transported back in time to the battlefields of World War II. He stared at the image, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The soldier was his doppelganger, a mirror image from another era. The discovery left him breathless and deeply unsettled. David couldn't shake the image of the soldier from his mind. Initial disbelief slowly morphed into a consuming fascination. He spent hours staring at the restored photo, comparing his own features to those of the soldier. He found himself neglecting his work, his apartment, and even his meals. The mystery of his doppelganger had become an obsession. He knew he needed to share this with someone to get an outside perspective. So, he decided to show the photo to his friends and family. First, he called his best friend, Mark, inviting him over for pizza and a weird photo I found. Mark, always up for a good mystery, arrived with an open mind. David showed him the photo, bracing himself for laughter or disbelief. Mark stared at the image for a long moment, his expression shifting from amusement to stunned silence. "Dude," he finally said, That's you? What's going on?" Encouraged by Mark's reaction, David showed the photo to his parents and his older sister, Sarah. Their reactions were similar: shock, confusion, and a healthy dose of skepticism. Sarah, a practical-minded lawyer, suggested it might be a distant relative. His parents, however, were more open to the idea of something stranger. The shared bewilderment only fueled David's obsession further. He had to find out who this soldier was and how they could look so alike. The reactions of David's inner circle were remarkably consistent. Everyone, despite their initial skepticism, conceded that the resemblance was undeniably uncanny. The scar, in particular, was the detail that convinced even the most doubtful. It was too specific, too unique to be dismissed as a mere coincidence. The conversation inevitably turned to the possibility of a family connection. "Maybe he's a great uncle you never knew about," his mother suggested, her eyes gleaming with intrigue. His father, a more reserved man, nodded thoughtfully. "It's possible. Our family history isn't exactly well documented." Sarah, ever the pragmatist, pointed out the potential challenges of tracing such a connection. World War II was a long time ago. Records might be incomplete or lost. And even if you find a link, it might be a very distant one. Despite Sarah's reservations, the idea of a family connection took root in David's mind. It seemed like the most logical explanation for the doppelganger phenomenon. He remembered snippets of stories he'd heard growing up about distant relatives who had served in the war. Perhaps this soldier was one of them, a forgotten branch on his family tree. He knew he had to investigate further, to delve into his family history and see if he could uncover the truth. The possibility of solving this mystery, of finding a tangible link to the soldier in the photo, was too tempting to ignore. David threw himself into researching his family history with the same meticulous dedication he applied to restoring photographs. He started by interviewing his parents and grandparents, carefully documenting their memories and anecdotes. He gathered old family albums, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and any other records he could find. He spent countless hours online, scouring genealogy websites and historical archives. He learned about distant relatives he never knew existed, tracing his family's lineage back several generations. He discovered stories of immigrants who had come to America seeking a better life, farmers who had tilled the land, and soldiers who had fought in previous wars. As he gathered information, David began to construct a detailed family tree, meticulously charting the connections between different branches of his family. He used online tools to visualize the tree, adding names, dates, and photos to each entry. The tree grew larger and more complex with each passing day, a testament to the rich and varied history of his family. He hoped that somewhere in that sprawling network of names and faces, he would find a link to the soldier in the photograph, a connection that would explain the uncanny resemblance and finally put his mind at ease. He felt like a detective, piecing together clues to solve a long-forgotten mystery. Weeks turned into months, and David's family tree grew ever larger and more detailed. He had traced his ancestry back to the early 1800s, uncovering countless names, dates, and stories along the way. But despite his exhaustive efforts, he found no direct link to the soldier in the photograph. He cross-referenced names, dates of birth, and locations, searching for any possible connection. He even looked for common surnames or family migration patterns that might suggest a distant relationship. But every lead turned into a dead end. The soldier remained an enigma, a face without a name or a place in his family history. David felt a growing sense of frustration and disappointment. He had invested so much time and energy into this search, convinced that a family connection was the key to unlocking the mystery. Now, it seemed he was no closer to the truth than when he had started. He stared at the family tree on his computer screen, a sprawling network of names that offered no answers. The soldier's face, now prominently displayed on his desk, seemed to mock him with its silent, knowing gaze. The logical explanation had failed, leaving David to wonder if there was something more unconventional at play. With his traditional genealogy research hitting a brick wall, David considered other options. Sarah, his sister, suggested a DNA test. Even if you can't find a direct link through documents, she said, a DNA test might reveal a distant cousin or shared ancestry that you've overlooked. David was hesitant at first. He wasn't sure he wanted to delve that deeply into his genetic makeup. But the mystery of the soldier consumed him. He rationalized that a DNA test could uncover connections beyond his meticulously researched family tree, perhaps revealing a shared ancestor from centuries ago. He ordered a DNA testing kit online and carefully followed the instructions, swabbing his cheek and sending the sample back to the lab. He knew the results could take several weeks, but the waiting was agonizing. He imagined all sorts of possibilities, from discovering a long-lost branch of his family to finding nothing at all. He tried to temper his expectations, reminding himself that a DNA test was just another tool, not a guaranteed solution. But deep down, he harbored a glimmer of hope that it would finally provide the answer he was seeking. It was another piece of the puzzle, and he desperately needed it to fit. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, while David was struggling to focus on a new advertising campaign. He saw the subject line, "Your DNA results are ready," and his heart skipped a beat. He clicked on the link, his hands trembling slightly. The website presented a detailed analysis of his genetic ancestry, breaking down his ethnic origins and identifying potential relatives. David scrolled through the results, searching for any familiar names or connections to his family tree. He found some distant cousins he didn't know existed, but nothing that shed any light on the soldier in the photograph. Then he reached the most crucial section, identical ancestor analysis. This section compared his DNA to other users in the database, searching for individuals with whom he shared a significant amount of genetic material, indicating a recent common ancestor. The results were surprising, to say the least. The website stated in bold letters, "No identical ancestors found." David stared at the screen in disbelief. It was impossible. How could he look exactly like someone, down to a unique scar, and share no recent common ancestors? The DNA test had effectively ruled out any direct or even distant family connection. The logical explanation had crumbled completely, leaving David adrift in a sea of unanswered questions. The mystery had deepened, becoming even more perplexing and unsettling than before. Desperate for answers, David decided to seek expert advice. He started by contacting the local historical society, hoping they could help him identify the soldier in the photograph or provide context about the unit he might have served in. He showed them the restored image and explained his fruitless search for a family connection. The historians were intrigued by the photo and the uncanny resemblance, but they couldn't offer any concrete information. They suggested he consult with genealogy experts who specialized in military records. David followed their advice, reaching out to several professional genealogists with expertise in tracing World War II veterans. He shared his family tree, the DNA test results, and the restored photograph, hoping they could shed some light on the mystery. The genealogists were initially optimistic, But after conducting their own research, they reached the same conclusion. There was no apparent connection between David and the soldier in the photo. They were baffled by the DNA results and the striking physical similarities. They admitted they had never encountered anything quite like it. David felt a growing sense of despair. If the experts couldn't explain it, who could? The experts' bewilderment only amplified David's own confusion. They reiterated the impossibility of the situation. Genetically speaking, it was statistically improbable to share so many physical similarities, including the unique scar, without any shared ancestry. They discussed the limitations of DNA testing, acknowledging that it wasn't foolproof, but maintained that the no identical ancestors found result was highly significant. One of the genealogists, a woman named Ms. Eleanor Ainsworth, speculated about more unconventional explanations. Perhaps it's a case of extreme convergent evolution, she suggested, where two unrelated individuals independently develop similar traits due to similar environmental pressures. But she quickly dismissed the idea, acknowledging that it couldn't explain the scar. Another expert, a retired military historian named Mr. Thompson, mentioned the possibility of misattributed parentage somewhere in David's family history. It's rare, he said, but sometimes people aren't who they think they are. However, he admitted that even that explanation wouldn't account for the soldier's striking resemblance to David. Ultimately, the experts were stumped. They offered their apologies and wished David luck in his search, but they couldn't provide any definitive answers. Their inability to explain the phenomenon only served to deepen the mystery, pushing David further down a rabbit hole of unanswered questions and unsettling possibilities. The silence after their consultations was more deafening than any explanation could have been. With all conventional avenues exhausted, David's mind began to wander into the realm of the unconventional. He found himself researching the doppelganger phenomenon, reading articles and anecdotes about people who had encountered their exact lookalikes, often with no apparent connection. Some theories suggested it was simply a statistical anomaly, a rare coincidence of genetic traits. Others proposed more mystical explanations, such as shared souls or parallel universes. He briefly considered the possibility of reincarnation, wondering if he had somehow lived a past life as the soldier in the photograph. He dismissed the idea as far-fetched, but couldn't completely shake the feeling that there was something more to this than met the eye. The most outlandish theory he encountered was time travel. Could it be possible that he was somehow related to the soldier through a future connection, a temporal anomaly that defied the laws of genetics and linear time? Again, he knew it was highly improbable, but the lack of any other explanation left him grasping at straws. David didn't truly believe in any of these theories, but they provided a temporary distraction from the frustrating reality of his situation. He knew they were likely nothing more than fanciful imaginings, but they offered a glimmer of hope, a suggestion that there might be something beyond the realm of science and logic that could explain the inexplicable. He wasn't ready to fully embrace these ideas, but he also wasn't ready to dismiss them entirely. The mystery had become too profound, too personal, to be confined to the limitations of conventional thought. Despite the dead ends and the unsettling theories, David refused to give up. He shifted his focus from his own family history to the soldier's identity. He realized that knowing the soldier's name and story might, in some way, provide a sense of closure, even if it didn't explain the resemblance. He returned to the original photograph, studying it with a magnifying glass. He noticed subtle details he had previously overlooked: the insignia on the soldiers' uniforms, the markings on the transport truck, the landscape in the background. He researched World War II military units, trying to match the insignia to a specific division or regiment. He spent hours poring over online databases of World War II veterans, searching for names and service records. He used facial recognition software to compare the soldier's face to thousands of images of World War II soldiers, hoping for a match. The search was tedious and time-consuming, but David was driven by a newfound determination. He felt a responsibility to uncover the soldier's story, to give him a name and a place in history. It was as if he owed it to him, a debt of gratitude for the mystery that had consumed his life. He hoped that by learning about the soldier, he could finally understand his own connection to him, however inexplicable it might be. After weeks of relentless searching, David finally had a breakthrough. He was cross-referencing a list of names from a World War II transport unit manifest with facial recognition results when a name popped up that sent a jolt through him: John Riley. The image associated with the name was blurry and low resolution, but it bore a striking resemblance to the soldier in the photograph. David clicked on the link, his heart pounding in his chest. The website displayed a brief service record: John Riley, Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division. David felt a wave of relief wash over him. He finally had a name, a rank, and a unit. The soldier was no longer just a face in a photograph. He was Sergeant John Riley, a real person who had served his country in World War II. David printed out the service record and pinned it to his bulletin board, next to the restored photograph. He felt a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that he had finally solved a crucial piece of the puzzle. But he knew that knowing Sergeant Riley's name was only the beginning. He still had to learn about his life, his experiences, and his fate in the war. He was determined to uncover the rest of Sergeant Riley's story, to honor his memory, and to understand why their paths had crossed in such an extraordinary way. David delved deeper into Sergeant Riley's military record, uncovering snippets of information that painted a picture of his service. He learned that Sergeant Riley had enlisted in 1941, just months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. He had trained extensively in the United States before being deployed to Europe in 1944. David found records of Sergeant Riley's participation in several major battles, including the Battle of Normandy. He read accounts of the 29th Infantry Division's heroic efforts in the face of fierce German resistance. He discovered commendations for Sergeant Riley's bravery and leadership under fire. But the most significant discovery was Sergeant Riley's date of death. David found a record stating that Sergeant John Riley had been killed in action on July 25, 1944, during the Battle of St. Lo. He had been just 23 years old. David felt a profound sense of sadness wash over him. The soldier who looked exactly like him had died, so young, fighting for his country. He wondered what Sergeant Riley's dreams had been, what he had hoped to accomplish in life. He felt a deep connection to this man he had never met, a connection that transcended genetics and logic. He knew he had to learn more about Sergeant Riley's final moments, to understand the circumstances of his death, and to honor his sacrifice. David eventually found an eyewitness account of Sergeant Riley's death in a regimental history book. The account described how Sergeant Riley's unit had been pinned down by heavy German machine gun fire during the advance on St. Lo. Several soldiers had been wounded, and the unit was in danger of being overrun. According to the account, Sergeant Riley had single-handedly charged the machine gun nest, drawing the enemy fire away from his comrades. He had managed to disable the machine gun, but he was mortally wounded in the process. His actions had allowed the rest of his unit to regroup and continue their advance, ultimately contributing to the capture of St. Lo. The account praised Sergeant Riley's courage, selflessness, and unwavering devotion to his men. He was hailed as a hero who had sacrificed his life to save his comrades. David was deeply moved by the story of Sergeant Riley's heroism. He realized that the soldier who looked exactly like him had been a truly remarkable person, a man of extraordinary courage and integrity. The mystery of their resemblance remained unsolved, but David felt a sense of peace knowing that Sergeant Riley had lived a life of purpose and had died a hero. The scar, he realized, was not just a random mark, but a symbol of something much deeper, a shared spirit of resilience and self-sacrifice. Despite the lack of any genetic link, David felt an undeniable and profound connection to Sergeant John Riley. It wasn't a connection of blood or shared history, but something deeper, something that resonated within his soul. He admired Sergeant Riley's courage, his selflessness, and his unwavering commitment to his fellow soldiers. He felt a sense of kinship with this man he had never met, a sense that they were somehow kindred spirits, bound together by fate or destiny. He realized that the mystery of their resemblance might never be solved, but that didn't diminish the importance of their connection. It was as if he had been chosen to discover Sergeant Riley's story, to bring his memory back to life, and to ensure that his sacrifice was not forgotten. David felt a responsibility to honor Sergeant Riley's legacy, to live his own life with the same courage and integrity that the soldier had displayed on the battlefield. He knew he couldn't replace Sergeant Riley, but he could strive to emulate his virtues and to make a positive impact on the world. The lack of a genetic connection no longer mattered. What mattered was the shared humanity, the shared spirit that bound them together across time and circumstance. David felt compelled to visit Sergeant Riley's grave. He discovered that Sergeant Riley was buried at the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial in France, overlooking the beaches where he had fought so bravely. He booked a flight to France, driven by a deep sense of purpose. He wanted to pay his respects to the soldier who had sacrificed his life for his country, to stand in the place where he had fallen, and to honor his memory. When David arrived at the cemetery, he was overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the place and the rows upon rows of white crosses and stars of David stretching out toward the sea. He found Sergeant Riley's grave, a simple white cross bearing his name, rank, and date of death. David stood there for a long time, gazing at the cross, lost in thought. He imagined Sergeant Riley as a young man, full of life and hope, fighting for a cause he believed in. He felt a surge of gratitude for his sacrifice, for the freedom he had helped to secure. He placed a small American flag on the grave and whispered a silent prayer. The air was still, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. It was a moment of profound peace and connection, a moment that transcended time and space. Returning home from France, David felt a sense of closure he hadn't anticipated. The mystery of their resemblance remained unsolved, a question mark hanging in the air, but he had made peace with it. He realized that the why was less important than the who. He knew who Sergeant John Riley was, what he had stood for, and how he had lived and died. That was enough. He decided to dedicate himself to honoring Sergeant Riley's memory. He shared his story with his friends and family, ensuring that the soldier's heroism would not be forgotten. He volunteered at a local veterans center, helping other veterans share their stories and find the support they needed. David continued to restore old photographs, but now he approached the task with a renewed sense of purpose. He saw each photograph as a window into the past, a chance to connect with the lives and experiences of those who had come before him. He understood that every face had a story to tell, and he felt a responsibility to preserve those stories for future generations. The mystery of Sergeant Riley had changed David's life, leading him on a journey of discovery, loss, and ultimately connection. He had learned that even in the face of the inexplicable, there was always room for compassion, gratitude, and remembrance. The scar on his cheek, once a source of confusion, now served as a constant reminder of the hero he had never met, but would never forget.